Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The former Iraqi president Saddam Hussein stood in court today with 7 of his senior aides in the framework of the Al-Dagal village court trial. The former Iraqi president said that he was subject to beating and torture by the Americans. Today's court session of Saddam Hussein and 7 of his senior aides was not much different from previous court sessions. The Iraqi people have gotten used to these court images and events and hope that the trial will come to an end. However, most observers still can't predict how the trial will end.
The Iraqi Supreme Criminal Court opens this session.
In the 6th session, the court heard 7 witnesses giving their testimonies, which were described as the most powerful testimonies so far. Witnesses said that they were beaten, tortured, and others faced hardships after the Al-Dagal event.
There was a lot of random shooting, creating fear among people. Guards and soldiers also were beating people with the back of their rifles, and I was among those who was beaten. On the same day, women from the city were also injured. My niece was one of those who was injured.
One of the witnesses said that Saddam's stepbrother, Brazan al-Takriti, who was the former director of the Iraqi intelligence, was present in the building where the torture took place, which was used to establish the case against the former Iraqi president. One of the defendant's lawyers and the former Qatari Minister of Justice, Najib Naami, commented on the threats that were made against the defense team in the Iraqi airport.
We were threatened at the airport, and we can't continue to participate in the coming sessions if there continues to be a lack of security.
These arguments may continue until tomorrow. The court will hear more testimonies and the defendants and their lawyers will respond. The court may end with a death sentence, or it will continue to examine other issues such as the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and the oppression of Saddam's Kurdish and Shiite political opposition groups.
A local leader of the Palestinian movement Hamas was shot dead today by Israeli soldiers in the West Bank city of Jenin. 28-year-old Zaid Musa was killed in an exchange of fire during the course of an Israeli incursion into the northern city. Meanwhile, Israeli soldiers entered 2 main northern West Bank cities today, engaging in clashes which left 8 Palestinians wounded. Soldiers rolled into the center of Nablus at daybreak, as well as the neighboring Balata refugee camp, where they came under attack from stone-throwing youths. The troops responded by firing rubber-coated bullets at the youths, wounding 6 in Nablus's old city neighborhood. In Balata, 2 members of Alsumaria brigade, an armed offshoot of the ruling Fatah faction, were lightly wounded by Israeli gunfire. The principal of the prestigious American school and his deputy were released today, hours after becoming the latest in a line of foreigners to be kidnapped in the Gaza Strip. Dutchman Henrik Tagten and his Australian assistant Brian Ambrosio were immediately taken to Gaza City headquarters of the Palestinian Authority after being freed by kidnappers who had apparently assumed they were American. Ambrosio said that they had been assured of their safety throughout their brief time in captivity. The pair had been abducted by gunmen earlier in the day when they were forced from their car as they approached the school in Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip and bundled into another vehicle. An offshoot of the leftist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine claimed responsibility for the kidnapping ahead of the pair's release, saying it was to protest against the detention of the PFLP's leader Ahmed Sadat. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is on a visit to Afghanistan. Today in Kabul, he said that the U.S. decision to cut its force in Afghanistan by up to 3,000 troops will not change its focus on counterterrorism in the country. Further, he had this to say.
We've discussed, the United States has recently announced some adjustments in our forces here from 3 brigades to 2. Of course, the U.S. will be continuing our contribution to NATO. We've been deeply involved in NATO since its beginning, and of course have been supportive of the NATO involvement in ISAF in each of its various stages, and will be continuing as an active participant in NATO's role in Afghanistan, as well as our individual role with respect to the counterterrorism efforts and the training and equipping of the Afghan security forces.
In light of recent developments regarding wiretapping, torture of terror suspects, renewal of the U.S. National Security Law or the Patriot Act, and Central Intelligence Agency CIA secret detention centers, the war on terrorism on one side and the protection of individuals' freedoms on the other side have stirred wide controversies among Americans.
Wiretapping may not be the last problem facing the Bush administration. It has been plagued by a number of crises, including the CIA secret prison scandal, which many terror suspects have been detained in undisclosed detention centers, and the renewal of U.S. national security law, or the Patriot Act, and the torture of prisoners in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay. The policies of George Bush have not only targeted individuals, but they have also targeted sovereign nations by directly occupying their lands in violation of international laws. Moreover, the policies have killed tens of thousands of innocent people in Iraq and Afghanistan in the so-called war on terrorism. The problem of wiretapping is still occupying the center of discussion among members of U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. Patrick Lee, Vice President of the U.S. Legal Affairs Committee, has written an open letter to Judge Samuel Alito, a U.S. Supreme Court nominee, asking him to state his position during a special hearing of his nomination next month on the extent of constitutional power given to the President and the degree of authority given to the U.S. Senate. It remains to be seen whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court, which is considered to be the monitor of the legislative and executive bodies, will succeed in restraining the defiance of the Bush administration and forcing it to abide by U.S. laws.
هل تستطيع كبح جماح الإدارة الأمريكية وإخضاعها للقانون الأمريكي؟
In the aftermath of the parliamentary elections, life went back to normal in Iraq. Meanwhile, Iraqis are waiting anxiously for the results amidst speculation that the new government will provide a sense of security for all Iraqis, leading to foreign troop withdrawal from Baghdad. Our reporter in Baghdad wandered the city streets to get some reactions of what Iraqis wish to see happen as the new government gets ready to swear in.
بعد إن فقدت شوارع بغداد علامات الحياة
Baghdad looked like a ghost town after the government imposed a curfew prohibiting the mobilization of vehicles on its streets during the election period. On the second day following the elections, life went back to normal in Baghdad, a town known for its crowds, rowdiness, and beauty. Street cleaners were on full force early in the morning, sweeping and cleaning litter, trash, and election posters left behind in and around polling stations. People were cautiously optimistic about the elections, hoping that their dreams will finally become a reality and that the new government will deliver what it had promised them. They also hope that all Iraqis will come together and stand united for the sake of the new Iraq.
تساعدهم للنهوض بالعراق الجديد.
والله أنظرها إن شاء الله بشكل أحسن وإن شاء الله تكون بعد أكثر أفضل.
God willing, the political situation will be better. The past few years had been very rough. God willing, we will get out of this mess soon and life will be better for all.
Many Iraqis suffered financial hardships during the election time because life came to a complete halt in Baghdad as a result of the general curfew imposed by the government.
We have been under curfew for 4 days. This is my first day in the streets after that lockdown. As a taxi cab driver, I lost some income, but I don't care, for the sake of Iraq. God willing, the new government of Iraq will provide us with a better life.
However, Iraqi men and women's dreams are haunted by high levels of unemployment and economic hardship. They are hoping that the government will provide jobs for everyone.
طبعا احنا نتمنى حياة جديدة مستقبل جديد.
We hope for a new life with a bright future that will make up for all the losses during the past few years. I'm a college graduate, and I wish the very best for all graduates, God willing.
نلقى في مستقبل زين إنه والكل زملائي الخريجين يعني إن شاء الله.
Needless to say that the Iraqi people, by taking part in the elections process, rose above and beyond all differences. Indeed, they ascended higher than those politicians who tried to divide the nation under the slogan of sectarianism, and history will bear witness to that. Elections are over, and life is once again up and running in Iraq, and the Iraqis began a new day with new hopes and new dreams, which they have worked hard for. History will write down the story of this great nation that had gone through so much and finally had reached the light of national unity, which will protect it and revive its spirit. Baghdad.
After the Sunni Arabs participated intensively in the parliamentary elections, the leader of the Iraqi Accordance Front List, Adnan Dulaimi, voiced his optimism regarding the success of the voting process and thanked the armed groups for abiding to the cooling-off period. While awaiting election results, Mr. Dulaimi confirmed that his coalition will join hands with other alliances that share the same platforms, principles, and objectives, including the unity and security of Iraq and the protection of its natural resources. Here is Rula Tanir in the following report. After boycotting previous elections, the Sunni Arabs participated intensively on the December 15th parliamentary elections. They called on armed fighters to protect polling stations to prevent any possible attacks on voting centers. In a press conference that was held today, Mr. Adnan Dulaimi, the leader of the Iraqi Accordance Front List, voiced his optimism regarding the election process, confirming that it was a successful one, but he cited that some minor violations had accompanied it.
وإن شابتها بعض الخروقات المحدودة على حد قوله.
Generally speaking, the voting process was a success, and this is great news regardless of who won the elections. Thank God the elections were a victory for all Iraqis, and it does not matter which coalition won or which one failed.
Mr. Dulaimi also called for the repeating elections in some areas that had witnessed fraud and foul play.
We request the election authority to hold elections again in those areas that had witnessed violations. We call on holding partial elections in those municipalities because some of the votes in favor of the Sunni Arabs had been deliberately written off, and we have the legitimate right to do so.
Moreover, Mr. Dulaimi thanked the armed groups for abiding to the cooling-off period and for taking part in protecting polling stations.
All armed factions of the resistance movement had abided by the ceasefire agreement and took it upon themselves to protect polling booths from possible attacks. The armed fighters had delivered what they had promised, and we thank them for that.
Mr. Dulaimi stressed the importance of forming an effective parliamentary alliance, and to achieve such a coalition, the Sunni Arabs are willing to join hands with those factions and groups who value the unity, security, and national resources of Iraq, and who care about having a balanced parliamentary power that is not based on sectarianism. However, Mr. Dulaimi stopped short of naming any of these groups that he may form an alliance with. It remains to be seen whether or not the Sunni Arabs, who finally decided to take part in the political process, will push the wheel of democracy forward. forward. Such a non-violence policy, if adopted by the Sunnis, will contribute a great deal to the process of rebuilding Iraq, restoring its security, and resolving its problems, especially since many of the problems are caused by the same political groups elected by the Iraqi people themselves.
Leaders of countries of the Gulf Corporations Council will hold their 26th summit in Abu Dhabi, which will last 2 days. The Secretary General of the Council confirmed that the timing of the summit is very important, and its agenda is full of controversial topics on the Arabic and regional levels.
Regionally, the security situation in Iraq is still unstable despite the latest parliamentary elections, which had a high voters' turnout among all sects of the Iraqi people, including the Sunni Arabs, who many believe will take part in putting an end to the violence that has been plaguing Iraq for 3 years. The 6 Gulf states which are attending this conference had worked hard on finding ways to restore security and calm in Iraq because the ongoing violence reflects negatively on those countries, especially since they are all geographically related. As far as the Palestinian problem is concerned, it has been and still is one of the topics discussed by member countries of the Gulf Corporations Council since its foundation in 1981. It is highly expected that the Palestinian problem will be one of the main issues discussed in this summit because of recent developments in the occupied territories, especially after the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. The files of the International Investigation Committee into the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri's assassination probe will also rank high among the topics that will be discussed in the Abu Dhabi summit. The Secretary General of the Gulf Corporations Council, Abed Ruhman Al-Attiyah, confirmed that convening countries are worried about the instability of the security situation in Syria and Lebanon. Mr. Al-Attiyah urged Syria to cooperate fully with the International Investigation Committee and to respect the international legitimacy. He also recommended to the UN to grant Damascus its wish of finding the truth surrounding Hariri's assassination. However, the most disturbing and controversial topic, which is causing panic and concerns among Gulf nations, is Iran's ambition of developing nuclear weapons. The Gulf states proposed a peaceful solution to the Iranian nuclear problems. It is through negotiations and talks between Tehran and the West that the crisis can end. Meanwhile, they are urging the Iranian government to cooperate with the UN and to refrain from escalating the situation. The Iranian nuclear problem is causing fear among Gulf states, especially since Tehran has already occupied 3 United Arab Emirate islands, Tum al-Kubra, Tum al-Sugra, and Abu Musa, and had refused to abide by international laws to solve the problem. In addition to these regional problems, there are still other issues to be hammered out in this summit, such as economic and social cooperation among member countries.
بتطوير الروابط الاقتصادية والاجتماعية بين دول التكتل هي الشغل الشاغل لقادة دول مجلس التعاون.
According to some critics, these internal and regional circumstances made the Abu Dhabi summit seem like any other summit. However, its timing and the political conditions are rather exceptional.
التي تنعقد فيها.
To shed more light on the most important files of this summit, we are joined in Cairo by Dr. Abdullah Al-Ash'ab, a professor of international law in Cairo University and an advisor for the former Egyptian foreign minister. The Gulf countries have a dilemma because they live between Iraq and a hard place. In one side is Iran and on the other side is Israel. If we assume that after 5 or 10 years, Iran will acquire nuclear capabilities, then we may be in the middle of a war of missiles between Israel and Iran. This would be very dangerous for the region, especially if these missiles are loaded with nuclear warheads. Also, is it possible for Iran to retaliate against Western presence in the region?
Of course, according to American statistics, there are 150,000 American soldiers in the region who could become the targets of Iranian retaliation, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. In addition, Iran may retaliate against targets in the Gulf. If this should happen, then there will be a dangerous situation. Both Israel and the United States know that Iran is a big country. It has huge missile capabilities. Israel has a history of targeting Arab countries outside its borders without fear of any retaliation.
خارج أراضيها وبالتالي ظلت إسرائيل مصونة من أي مساس سوى المقاومة الفلسطينية التي دخلت.
دكتور عبد الله لكي نستكمل الصورة ولو سريعا باقي.
Dr. Abdullah, we only have 1 minute. Iran is interfering in Iraq's internal affairs. These were the words of the Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal. George Casey, the commanding general of the multinational force, also said the same thing and added that Iran pumps millions of dollars into Iraq in order to create an Iraqi government which accommodates Iranian interests. To what degree can the Gulf countries be affected by an Iranian-controlled government in Iraq?
لأنه الشيعة بطبيعتهم لهم مذهب سياسي. I
believe that this cannot be stopped from happening because Shiites by nature have political loyalty to Iran. As the Saudi foreign minister said in New York, shortly before the Arab foreign ministers met in Jeddah, the United States has handed Iraq to Iran on a golden plate. The important thing is not who will benefit from this. The fact of the matter is that the Gulf countries will suffer a lot if an alliance is formed between Iran and the Shiites in the region. The problem is that the Gulf countries have a Shiite population that is loyal to Iran and want to form an alliance with it.
We thank our professor in international law in Cairo University, Dr. Abdullah Al-Ash'al.
In Cairo, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his Egyptian counterpart Hosni Mubarak held talks that revolved around Syrian-Lebanese relations, Resolution 1644, calling on Syria to cooperate with the UN probe into the February 14th assassinations. In a parallel meeting, Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk al-Sharer held talks with his counterpart Ahmad Abu Ghait and said there were more important things to discuss than the demarcation of the Syrian-Lebanese border. Yumna Tayara has the latest developments.
In the few hours visit to Cairo, Syrian-Lebanese relations topped separate discussions between Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Foreign Minister Farouk al-Sharer, and their Egyptian counterparts, President Hosni Mubarak and Ahmad Abu Ghait. Following the meeting with Abu Ghait, Sharer said, now that the head of the International Committee into the assassination of former Lebanese Premier Rafik Hariri changed and a new head would be appointed, Syria would cooperate constructively and would assist him to reach the truth when he would visit Damascus. Belgian prosecutor Serge Barametz was expected to take over as head of the international inquiry into the Hariri assassination from German prosecutor Detlef Melius, who had directly blamed the Syrian authorities for Hariri's murder. Sharer said his country was not going to discuss with the new prosecutor previous developments in the investigation and would start from a clean slate. He was referring to what Damascus claims were false testimonies which gave statements that do not serve the probe or the truth. Sharer added that Syria was prepared to discuss with the Lebanese side the controversial issue of their common borders, but only after bilateral relations improve. Sharer denied that Damascus was playing down the significance of the border issue, stressing that there were more important issues between the two countries. A demarcation would diffuse tension over the continued presence of Syrian troops in some disputed areas and would help reduce alleged arms smuggling from Syria to armed groups in Lebanon and elsewhere. Lebanon had long called for an exchange of embassies between the two countries, which have never established diplomatic relations since their independence in the 1940s. Sharer reiterated that his government was determined to improve relations with Lebanon. For his part, Abu Ghait said, talks focused on the main regional issues related to the Melis investigation and the latest UN Security Council decision and how Syria dealt with it, as well as Syrian-Lebanese relations and how to advance them. The foreign ministers joined the presidents for lunch before the Syrians headed back home. Following the president's meeting, sources in Cairo said an aide to Lebanese Prime Minister Fuad Sennoura, Radwan Sayed, also held separate talks with Mubarak. No further details regarding the meeting was available.
Leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was in hand for a joint military ceremony at an army academy in Tehran on Wednesday. Later in a speech, the leader said the armed forces symbolize the might of the Iranian nation. Referring to the threats posed by the U.S.-led hegemonic powers against independent countries, Ayatollah Khamenei said under circumstances as such, nations have no choice but to boost their capabilities, rely on the Almighty, and build on their self-confidence to stand up for their rights. The leader emphasized that independent nations should try to their overall might in the areas of diplomacy, economy, science, and especially in the defense sector. Still later in the visit, the select units hit the parade ground before the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Talks between Iran and the European Union's Big Three ended in Vienna on Wednesday with an agreement to hold more negotiations in the same place in January. Following the talks, Iranian chief negotiator Javad Vaidi said the negotiations are aimed at determining whether there was a basis for further discussion between the two sides. In a related comment, Iranian Foreign Minister Mansour Mottaki termed the talks as serious, targetful, and fruitful. The top diplomat added, non-deviation of Iran's nuclear activities and the European guarantees to recognize Iran's legitimate rights were the main issue raised at today's talks. Tehran says it hails any effort to boost its ties with the neighboring states. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad told a cabinet session on Wednesday that Iran's foreign policy is largely based on enhancing relations with Islamic nations. The president also described Iran-Azerbaijan gas pipeline as a key to bolster ties with Iran's neighbors. The chief executive also said the government has a special focus on the objectives of the 9th cabinet in drafting the budget for the next fiscal year. The 29-member panel tasked with probing into recent C-130 Army plane crash, which left 104 people killed on board, released a statement on Wednesday saying preliminary investigation shows the plane suffered no technical problems on takeoff. The report also said for technical reasons, the fourth engine was turned off by the pilot 8 minutes after the plane left Merabat Airport. The statement added no message was transmitted for 110 seconds before the plane hit the ground. Experts with the panel are now making efforts to find out the root causes behind the deviation of the liner from the landing approach corridor. Meanwhile, Iranian Parliament Speaker Ghulam Ali Haddad Adel said the impeachment of the defense minister has been adjourned to a later time. Tonight marks the longest night all throughout the year, known in Iran as Yalda Night, an old tradition which draws the younger members of the family to elders for a special get-together when the night falls, ushering in the start of the winter season. Older members of the family tell old stories. The friendly get-together also includes long chats and serving of nuts and fruits, especially watermelon. The word Yalda, meaning birth, reflects an ancient tradition based on which Iranians believe that the first dawning of the Iranian month of day, falling on December 21st, marks the rebirth of the sun. Reading poems by the outstanding Iranian poet Hafez is a major activity of the night.
خوش بود حال حافظ و فال مراد کام بسیار فال قالیه.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.